You wake up at the same time. You reach for your phone before your eyes fully open. You make the same coffee. Take the same route. React to the same triggers with the same emotions you've had for as long as you can remember. You'd call it routine. Science calls it something far more unsettling. It's a program, and you didn't write it. The human brain processes approximately 11 million bits of information per second. Consciously, you access roughly 40 of them. The rest, the overwhelming invisible majority, is handled beneath your awareness by a system you never see, never question, and almost never override. Neuroscientists call it the subconscious mind, but a more accurate name might be your default operating system. And here is what makes that disturbing. The foundational code of that system, the beliefs you hold about yourself, about safety, about love, about what you deserve, was written before you were 7 years old. Not by you, by your environment, your caregivers, your earliest experiences of pain and comfort, of acceptance and rejection, by a world that was programming you long before you had the capacity to evaluate what was being installed. Research in developmental psychology consistently shows that the first 7 years of life represent a period of hypnotic-like brain activity. The child's brain operates predominantly in theta wave states, the same frequencies associated with deep meditation and heightened suggestibility in adults. In plain terms, during the most formative years of your life, your brain was in maximum absorption mode with minimum critical filtering. Everything went in. The spoken and the unspoken. The love you received and the love that was withheld. The words said once in anger that somehow never left. All of it encoded, filed, set as default. This is why you can intellectually know your worth and still shrink in a room full of people. This is why you can understand that not every relationship will end in abandonment and still push people away before they get close. This is why you can know better and still, somehow, not do better. Because knowledge lives in the conscious mind. The program runs somewhere deeper. You are not weak. You are not broken. You are not lacking discipline or willpower or desire. You are simply running code that was never yours. The question isn't who you are. The question is, who wrote the code? Here is what nobody tells you about self-awareness. It is not the solution. It is only the moment the problem becomes visible. Millions of people have sat across from therapists, consumed hundreds of hours of psychology content, journaled their patterns into perfect clarity, and changed almost nothing. Not because the information was wrong, but because understanding a program intellectually does not interrupt it neurologically. The brain does not restructure itself through insight alone. It restructures through experience, repetition, emotional intensity, and deliberate interruption. Knowing the cage exists is not the same as walking out of it. Here is what reprogramming actually looks like, not in theory, but in practice. It begins not with grand transformation, but with a single moment of non-reaction. The trigger fires. The old response rises, automatic, familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. And instead of following it, you pause. Not forever. Just long enough to insert one conscious choice between stimulus and response. That gap, that fraction of a second of chosen stillness, is not small. That gap is everything. Because in that pause, you are no longer the program. You are the programmer. Think about the overachiever who cannot rest, not because they love work, but because somewhere in childhood, stillness felt like invisibility. They learned that performance earned presence, that output equaled worth. And so decades later, they grind, not from ambition, but from an old fear dressed in a new suit. Think about the person who abandons relationships before relationships can abandon them, who mistakes self-protection for strength and loneliness for independence, who learned very early that love came with conditions, and decided somewhere beneath conscious thought that it was safer to leave first. These are not character flaws. These are survival strategies that outlived their usefulness. And survival strategies, no matter how outdated, will not dissolve through understanding alone. They dissolve through consistent, repeated, emotionally engaged new experience until the nervous system stops treating the present like the past. This is where most people stop. Not because they cannot change, but because real reprogramming is unglamorous. It does not feel like a breakthrough. It feels like choosing differently on a Tuesday morning when every instinct says to revert. It feels like sitting with discomfort instead of escaping it. It feels slow, invisible, and deeply uncertain. And then, without announcement, it becomes who you are. Not the program you inherited. Not the fear that was handed to you before you could speak, but a self you actually, consciously chose. You did not choose your first program, but you are choosing right now in this moment, whether to examine it or excuse it, whether to defend it or dismantle it. The code can be rewritten. The question is no longer, can you change? The question is, are you willing to be uncomfortable long enough to find out who you actually are beneath everything you were taught to be? And we want to ask you something, directly. What is one belief you carry about yourself today that you know, deep down, you never actually chose? Leave it in the comments. Not for us. For the version of you that is finally ready to rewrite it.